CPUs. There's so many out there. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about CPUs and the right way to choose a CPU. Not as much as a buying guide, but something to where you could probably put your finger on what you're looking for. If you're interested later on all the cool little benefits of a CPU, or not the benefits, but the details like the frequencies, the base clock, what does all that mean, the cache, the different types of, the different routines that a CPU goes through. I'll have a video up later. Now, with all that out of the way, let's talk CPUs. I know you've seen a lot of videos before you clicked on this one, so you already have an idea of AMD and Intel. You know who they are. They are the two main manufacturers of CPUs. Which one is better? Where will you get the most benefit? Depends on you and how much you're willing to spend. AMD Ryzen, AM4 socket. Make sure that the CPU is compatible with the motherboard, the chipset, but AM4 socket for the Ryzen processors, the Zen Plus, the Zen 2. The Intel, they got the Comet Lake and Coffee Lake. Comet Lake is LGA 1200 and Coffee Lake is LGA 1151 sockets. Once you narrow down your CPUs, again, just look at the motherboards that it's compatible with. Look at what you're going to be using your computer for. Then find your processor. It's not really that hard. There are only two main companies, AMD and Intel. Then from there, they have their CPU lineups. If you're going to be running multiple programs that take up a lot of cores, then look into it. Look into a bigger CPU. So if you're going to be running a software that uses 4 cores, and in the background you're going to have another software that's going to take a few cores, make sure you look at a 6-core 12-thread processor. Shut some apps down in the background. That way they're not taking up any system memory or using too much of your CPU. That way you could do what you're trying to do with your computer. So use some common sense here. Look up the software that you're planning to use the most on your PC. Go on its website and look up its minimal requirements. Then you could go from there. Also, while you're there, look up other software that you're going to be using. The CPU is the first part of your build you're going to look into. It is the #1 thing in your computer. Whether you're a gamer, editor, it's your CPU. If you're a gamer, next would be your GPU. Even though your GPU is probably going to be the most expensive part of your build, your CPU. Your CPU is the brain. It's what does all the mathematical equations, sends them to the screen. The easiest thing to do is just stay new. If you buy a new processor and a new motherboard, they're going to be compatible. It's hard to bottleneck your CPU and your GPU as long as you use common sense. Don't use an $80 CPU or a $100 CPU with a several $100 GPU or $2,000 or $3,000 GPU. You want to try and stay within the numbers. So if you buy a $100 CPU, look at a couple $100 GPU. After you've determined your workload, you do need to know that processors have gotten smaller, stronger, and better. So basically every gaming computer is a work computer, it's an editing computer, it's a rendering computer. You know, it's just how well it does each of those jobs. All Ryzen CPUs right now, the Zen, Zen Plus, Zen 2 architecture, those are all unlocked. Intel, you'd have to make sure that you get a K variant. Just know that you do have the added benefit in the future that if you have an overclockable CPU and a motherboard that does support overclocking and you got the cooling, then you have that benefit in the future if you do choose to seek it out. But do know that it does put some stress, more stress on your CPU and your components. It does degrade it a little bit faster and it does void your warranty. And if you're an honest person, because they really wouldn't know you did it unless you tell them, but if you're an honest person, you're gonna void your warranty. It's just plain and simple. And right now with Ryzen and Ryzen Master, the software that comes with your CPU, it has a precision boost overdrive. Basically what that means is if the CPU sees that there's enough headroom, like cooling, if the CPU is not running hot, if there's enough power, there's more power sitting inside the power supply and it could draw more, Well, it sees it sitting on the table, so it's gonna automatically boost up closer to those boost clock numbers, because you're gonna have two numbers on the CPU. You're gonna have your base clock and then your boost clock. Base clock is what it's supposed to run at all the time. The boost clock, that's what it could go up to when it pushes itself. So that's what precision boost overdrive, good word, will kick in for you. But like I said, it's nothing to worry about. Not yet, at least. So look at overclocking as something down the road, as a way of tuning your machine a little bit more once you are comfortable and got your feet wet in using your system, with messing around a little bit with Ryzen software. Overclocking is something down the road when you start seeing those stutters in your computer, when you start seeing it's not running as fast. Newer software has come out. Maybe your stuff has fallen back a little bit. Give overclocking a try. You have nothing to lose at that point. Give it a little bit of a boost. See, maybe then your system will be up to par with what you need it for in the future. Multi-threading. A lot of different programs nowadays are starting to use multi-threading as an added benefit to get more work done a little bit faster and using the CPU more efficiently. I don't remember where I saw it, but the best analogy I saw for multi-threading was, think of a worker in a factory that has two conveyor belts. As he's working on his main conveyor belt, it stops bringing items for him to work. So he'd move to the second conveyor belt and he'd start doing things. And as soon as something would come back over here on this side, he'd stop on this conveyor belt and go back to his other conveyor belt. That's basically how multi-threading works. It just basically, when its main process is in downtime, it'll move to a second process. So it's using each core a little bit more efficiently. They have their APUs, which are basically CPUs that have a built-in Vega Radeon graphics. What that means is you don't need a graphics card. A lot of these will say like 3600, but if you see it says G on it, it basically has a graphics card. This doesn't, and it will tell you right underneath all of here, it'll say discrete graphics card required, because this isn't an APU from AMD. Now, Intel does have APU, but they're not called APUs. They have some other name for it, I forgot what it was, but there are benefits to having an APU. It's like if your motherboard has HDMI or some type of video out coming straight from the motherboard, then you'd be able to run some type of games or graphics on your screen. And if your graphics card, your GPU, ever goes out, you have an option to run straight off your motherboard until you either repair it or purchase a new graphics card. So they do have an added benefit. But the new Ryzen APUs, the 3400G, I believe, even though it's a 3400, it isn't a Zen 2. It's still based on Zen Plus. So this is your building block. This is your building block. It's your CPU, whatever you go with. It is where you're gonna build around. So find the minimal requirements of the CPU needed for your software. Then we could look at your motherboard, your GPU, RAM, and the rest of it. But CPU, to recap, look up the software and the requirements to run that software. How many cores, how many gigahertz. Look up all the software that you plan to use. A couple games, some different programs, and then you can make a better choice, or at least narrow down to at least 3 or 4 CPUs. Then you could take those and look up benchmarks towards those. See how they run. You might get lucky and might find somebody doing a benchmark on what you use, and that will help you a lot. So I recommend benchmarks for the CPUs that you've narrowed your choice. So I promised you a reference, and here it is. It's from AMD. It was released by them so you can make sure the CPU is compatible with the motherboard. So take a snapshot. I'll leave it up on the screen a little longer so that way you could take a snapshot of it. So yeah, go ahead and do that. As for Intel, I looked and looked and I couldn't find anything. Maybe they do have one, I just couldn't find it. But the same thing with Intel. Narrow down the CPU you're looking for. So guys, this was my first video. I tried to stay on script best as I could, but I do tend to ramble. So I hope this video wasn't too long, and I really hope I helped you. This wasn't a what to buy video. This was just more how to look for what to buy. Basically, look up what you need. Find the requirements. Get a few in mind, some CPUs in mind. Write them down. Look up benchmarks, and that will help a lot. Just to get you started. We'll talk about GPUs and RAM and the necessities for that. Again, thanks for watching, guys. I hope this video was easy to understand, because that's what I was really going for in the end. Don't forget to subscribe, like, or dislike. It's up to you. Just do me a favor. If you do dislike, down in the comments, tell me where I can improve to make this better. I've really wanted to make YouTube videos for a very long time. So I hope that down below you guys give me some good sound advice. Bad advice, good advice, negative, positive. Put it down below. I will read it. Since I am just starting, I will go through every comment. Don't expect me to get boiled up if you do write a bad review. I won't get boiled up. And also, kids in the background, we are working from home nowadays. So got all the kids at home. I do have 5 boys. Hit the bell for future notifications for some future videos. I'll have some builds on here. I do have some recordings of some builds that I did. So I'll have those up here too.